Hello everyone, salam, namaste, adab, and welcome to today's event at Indian Diaspora, Washington, DC Metro. Today we are going to listen to Professor Dr. Nazeer Ahmed on the history, science, and faith in Islamic education. He will be introduced by Dr. Ijaz Naqvi, who is a board of trustee, graduate theological union, Berkeley, and author of bestseller Amazon book, 3 Abrahamic Testaments. And the concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Bashir Ahmed, a well-known professor of psychiatry in Texas and former chairman, Institute of Medieval and Post-Medieval Studies, North Texas. So welcome you all. And I invite now Dr. Ijaz Naqvi to give the opening remarks. Thank you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Kareem once again to all of you. Again, I'm Dr. Ijaz Naqvi, and in Islam, we have the word of Allah, the glorious Quran, and the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the sayings of other nobles such as Imam Ali. I'm going to quote them all today to show how much emphasis is placed on knowledge and education in Islam. From the Holy Quran, this is a verse that is all too familiar to most of us. And I recite this every time I give a speech or I embark on something that is to attain knowledge. And it says, Rabbi zidni ilma, O Rabb, or O Lord, increase me in my knowledge. And there are hadiths, and I'll quote some of them, the hadith sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. The seeking of knowledge is obligatory on every Muslim. Just think about the possibilities of today's Islamic world. Paid attention to this hadith. Another hadith, acquire knowledge and impart it to people, meaning don't just get the knowledge, but share it with other people or use it. Another one, acquire knowledge even if you have to go to China, meaning it was so difficult at the time. And the last one, Ana Madinatul Ilmin Aliun Babuha. I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its gate. So let me now quote some of these sayings from Hazrat Ali. The most complete gift of God is a life based on knowledge. Everything diminishes when it's used except knowledge. Half of the knowledge is the ability to say, I don't know. And how true is that? And I can say it from the experience. And this quote goes to the root of our speaker's topic today. Take lessons from your history because history often repeats itself. Last couple of ones. No wealth like education and no poverty like ignorance. And knowledge is better than wealth because it protects you while you have to protect wealth. So with that little background on some of the emphasis that is placed, and it's a very, very, very tiny sample. And let me introduce our guest. And it's a distinct honor given to me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Nazeer Ahmed. And I can go on, but I'll just spend a couple of minutes. And I don't know if there's anyone who is better suited to discuss the topic at hand today, Islam, history, science, and knowledge. Dr. Nazeer Ahmed was a chief scientist on the NASA Hubble telescope. He was a group leader on the NASA Apollo Moon landing project and a program manager on a large number of space-based LWIR sensor programs of national importance. Don't ask me what LWIR sensor programs are. He was born into a farming family in the princely state of Nazeer in 1939. Dr. Ahmed excelled earlier on in his studies, securing the first rank in his state. He won the All India Competitive JRD Tata Fellowship for the year 1961 and entered California Institute of Technology in LA area as an institute scholar. He earned his master's and a Master's of Science and AEI degrees from Caltech and proceeded to work at the Marshall Space Flight Center on the moon landing project. He earned his doctorate in theoretical and applied mechanics from Cornell and earned his MBA in international finance from Rider University. And he has many honorary doctorates from several universities. Other than that, I guess he just continued to ignore education. I'm just kidding. I'm so totally impressed. Dr. Ahmed is a prolific inventor and holds 12 United States patents in space technologies. He's the author of scores of scientific articles in international journals and presented before the US National Congress of Applied Mechanics and at forums at Harvard. And he also has a busy political life. In 1978, he was elected member of Karnataka Legislative Assembly in India. 10 years later, he was an elected delegate to the Democratic National Convention. In 1992, he ran for the US Congress from the 46th Congressional District in California. He also served in Karnataka State Knowledge Commission from 2013 to 2019, and the only Muslim to do so. He's a keen observer of human nature. Dr. Ahmed is also a recognized historian. And in his book, Islam in Global History, he offers fresh insights into the law of civilization. And he has translation of the Quran into easy to read American English that have been read by 3 million people worldwide. He's a public servant. He worked with Dr. Shafi Ahmed to establish HMS Institute of Technology. He also has built a unique Eidgah and mosque and schools and madrasas, and under his charitable foundations, has given thousands of scholarships to the needy. He's a scientist, a scholar, an inventor, legislator, public servant. Dr. Nazeer Ahmed will now provide us some insights into the science, history, and faith in Islamic education. Dr. Nazeer, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum, namaste, namaskar. It's always a privilege to be speaking to this distinguished audience. And thank you, Dr. Ejaz, for this wonderful introduction. We live in extraordinary times. These are times when human progress is limited only by the speed of light and the human capacity to absorb change. Humankind has conquered space and searches for life on other planets. Giant telescopes seek to unlock the very origin of the known universe. Terms such as space travel, the theory of relativity, and the Big Bang have entered into common discourse. Machine learning and robotics drive cutting-edge technologies and seek to replace human reasoning with artificial intelligence. Indeed, we are now headed into a post-human world in which the very essence of being human is challenged. Yes, these are extraordinary times. Economic centration, driven by the inexorable forces of globalization, produces billionaires by the day, while millions go to bed with a hungry stomach. Within this global context, the story of India is a special case. While Indian rockets reach out to Mars, hundreds of millions cannot afford a meal a day. In this matrix of poverty, the Muslims in India are a marginalized minority, hemmed in not only by the global forces of economic centration, but also by the well-financed global Islamophobia industry and the incessant hammering from Hindutva forces. Similar is the case with the Dalits and other marginalized groups. It is with this background that we approach the topic under discussion today, namely history, science, and faith in Islamic education. The subject is deep and the terrain is vast. All we can do in the next 40 minutes is to survey this vast terrain, whet our appetite, anchor our observations and historical benchmarks, connect the dots, ask questions, and learn from them as we go. If I may have the slide on epistemology, if possible. Knowledge is a gift from God. It is one and indivisible. It is not denied to anyone. Its ultimate purpose is to find the truth. There is no such thing as the Western knowledge, Eastern knowledge, Christian knowledge, Jewish knowledge, Hindu knowledge, Muslim knowledge, secular knowledge, and religious knowledge. These are all specific wavelengths in the composite spectrum that constitutes the totality of knowledge. Each wavelength brings out a different color of the ultimate truth. As such, each one is valid within its own context and its own assumptions. A man of truth is one who's open to the vistas that are offered at various wavelengths. Education embraces the means, methods, and processes for acquiring knowledge. What is knowledge? What is its purpose? How does the human learn? These are profound philosophical questions that have challenged the sages through the ages. They relate to the most basic question, what makes us human? This presentation focuses on Islamic education. As such, it brings with it its own doctrinal, historical, philosophical, and cultural assumptions. It is offered here only as a means to further intercultural understandings. I hope that in future forums, we will have the privilege of learning about other faith-based or non-faith-based approaches to knowledge and the acquisition of knowledge. In the Islamic paradigm, God is the source, the origin, the locus, and the ultimate object of all knowledge. Its essence is embodied in the divine name Al-Haq, which at once means the truth, justice, balance, rights and responsibilities. As the Hadith Qudsi declares, I was a hidden treasure. I willed that I be known. Therefore, I created a creation that would know me. Incidentally, justice is the first pillar in the preamble to the Constitution of the Republic of India. How does one encompass this ocean of knowledge? Some 50 years ago, when I first wrote my first book, What Makes Us Human, I constructed a possible approach to the epistemology of knowledge. It's illustrated in the diagram shown. If I may have the next slide, please. The tree of knowledge has its roots in the heavens, and its seed is Al-Haq, the truth. The knowledge that is imparted to the prophets and the sages is called Ilmul Laduni. Its mode of transmission is infusion. It is involuntary. It speaks the timeless, spaceless language of the spirit. It is light that illuminates the soul. It seeks to answer the basic questions that every human asks at one stage or the other. Who am I? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my existence? When heavenly knowledge is applied to the mundane world, it splits into two major branches. The first is knowledge that can be expressed and taught. In the Urdu language, it is called Ilmul Ibarat. Ibarat comes from the Arabic root abara, ain, be, re, namely to wade from one shore of a stream to another. It includes the inductive, empirical knowledge of the sciences and the deductive knowledge of reason and philosophy. It embraces the sciences, history, economics, medicine, engineering, mathematics, politics, and governance. This is the knowledge that we send our children and grandchildren to Harvard and MIT, Stanford and Caltech, and yes, Aligarh and the IITs to acquire. It is knowledge that commands a price in the marketplace. The other branch, Ilmul Ishara, is knowledge that can be alluded to but cannot be expressed through language. It cannot be taught. It includes the language of the heart and the language of the soul. Examples are love, compassion, mercy, empathy, forgiveness, generosity. In all of God's creation, there is nothing as sublime, as noble as the heart, because it alone is the seat of unfettered love. Nay, it is wide enough to contain the very name of God Almighty. It is not Hindu or Muslim, Christian or Jewish, Sikh or Zoroastrian, American or Russian. This is the knowledge taught by the saints and the Sufis of the past. The language of love, of unconditional service, of rapture and surrender. This is the language that is expressed by Amir Khusro when he sings out in ecstasy, Nami danam che manzil bud, shab jaye ke man budam. The next view graph, please. Human history is like a mighty river that flows with discernible bends. Some bends are sharp, Others are slow like a sine wave with a long wavelength. Islamic history offers at least 7 major discernible bends. Each of these bends marks the onset of a certain mode of learning and the emergence of a corresponding cultural archetype. First, the age of the prophet. Second, the age of the companions. Third, the age of reason. Fourth, the age of the scientists. 5, the age of the Sufis. And lastly, colonialism, the age of discontinuity, and the modern technological age. One way to study each epoch is to examine the archetypes that personify the age. Summarily, the archetypes at the time of the prophet was the prophet himself. During the age of the companions, it was the visionaries. In the age of reason, it was the Mutazilites. In the age of the scientists, it was the empresses. In the age of the Sufis, it was the awliya. Colonialism gave birth to revivalists, while the modern technological age is shaping the post-human, post-scientific monad. The next slide, please. Islam burst upon the global scene in the 7th century and transformed a nomadic people into prime movers of a global civilization. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the architect of the transformation. Few are the personages in history who occupied a position in relation to their people as did Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam with respect to his. He was the focus for all social, spiritual, political, economic, and juridical activities. He was the teacher, the exemplar, the prophet. Indeed, he was the messenger of God. 4 attributes of the prophet stand out when we seek to understand his legacy on education. First, the Quran. The prophet was the personification of the Quran. If the Quran was the book, he was the light. The first word of the Quran was Iqra, read, and the prophet was an embodiment of knowledge. After Badr, when a large number of prisoners were taken, he offered to set them free, if each of them taught 2 people how to read and write. His saying, seek knowledge, even unto China, is well known. China was a distant land known for its learning, but it was not Islamic. Alas, if only the ulama in later centuries had kept the prophet's example before them and not rejected learning from other traditions, be it Western or Eastern. I offer as an example the tribulations that Sir Sayyid had to face from the mullahs when he founded the Anglo-Mohammedan College, later to become Aligarh University. Then we have the hadith, the sunnah, and the seerah. What the prophet said became the hadith. What he did became the sunnah. The seerah was his path, his methodology, his example, his way, which exuded the vision and the wisdom of his approach. Once again, examine how later Muslims, especially those in the subcontinent, took the broad highways of the prophet's approach to knowledge and turned them into narrow, sinewy alleys. The Ahle Hadith and the Ahle Sunnah are each other's throats, while neither of them ponders over his seerah or the wisdom of his approach in tackling contemporary issues. The tensions between the Deobandi and the Barelvi schools are well known. The next slide, please. Civilizations are tested with crises, just as individuals are tried with adversity. It is these critical moments that bring out the character of a civilization. Great civilizations measure up to their challenge and grow more resilient with each crisis, turning adversity into opportunity. It is much the same way with individuals. Critical moments in history test the mettle of humans. Great men and women bend history to their will, whereas weaker ones are swallowed up in the convulsions of time. The death of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was the first historical crisis faced by the Islamic community. The Muslims met this challenge by establishing the institution of the Khilafat and affirming the continuity of historical Islam. The price paid for this process was the Shia-Sunni split that continues to rock the Islamic world even after 1400 years. There emerged the towering personalities of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali radiallahu anhum. What these companions did and did not do has influenced the course of Islamic history in the subsequent 1400 years. We see in this period an increasing emphasis on documentation, as it was with Sahaba Siddiqi. Umar radiallahu anhu in particular paid attention to education. He appointed teachers paid by the state treasury and established schools in the far-flung corners of the Khilafat. There was an explosion of intellectual activity in the period that followed. Jurisprudence, philosophy, and science flourished. The halakha, or a study circle centered around a sheikh, became the institutional framework for knowledge transmission. As the Khilafat expanded to include vast regions, stretching from the Indus River to the Pyrenees Mountains in France, it embraced Greeks and Turks, Iranians and Egyptians, Berbers and Spaniards, Africans and Europeans, Chinese and Indians. The new entrants brought with them not only the ancient heritage and culture, but methods of looking at the sublime questions of life in ways fundamentally different from that of the Arabs. Fiqh was the doctrinal response of the Islamic civilization to these challenges. The codification of fiqh solidified the foundation of Islamic civilization and was the cement for its stability through the turmoil of centuries. As long as the process of fiqh was dynamic, creativity and ideas flowed from Islam to other civilizations. When this process became static and stagnant, historical Islam increasingly turned inwards and became marginalized in the global struggle of mankind, as is too obvious in India today. Some definitions of the terms Sharia and fiqh are in order here, as the two terms are sometimes erroneously interchanged. Sharia derives its legitimacy from divine sovereignty. It defines not just the relationship of man to man, but also the relationship of man to God and of man to nature. As such, it's all-embracing and its dimensions are infinite. The sun rises from the east, that is Sharia. The galaxies rotate, there are black holes, that is Sharia. Fiqh is the application of the Sharia in space-time. As such, it is dynamic and changing. Those who wish to understand the hijab controversy in India today need to keep this in mind. We'll offer the life and times of Imam Abu Hanifa as an archetype of the age. It's most appropriate to choose him as our model, as his school of jurisprudence is the one that is most commonly used in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Turkey, and Central Asia. Indeed, a great majority of the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world today follow the school of fiqh named after him. That Imam Abu Hanifa was one of the greatest of jurists is well known. What is not known is that he was also a mathematician of the first magnitude. He was aware of the concepts of specific density and specific volume and implemented them in practice. As a philosopher, his work anticipated the Hegelian dialectic by more than 1,000 years. To cap it all, Abu Hanifa was no hermit or a pure academician, cloistering himself in a monastery or a mosque or a university. He was a rich man, a successful merchant, a wonderful human being who lived among common folk with the zest and enthusiasm of a believer and contributed to the life of the community that he was a part of. The story of Imam Abu Hanifa is the story of the famed city of Baghdad. With the Abbasid revolution of 750, the center of gravity of political power shifted from the Arab heartland to Persia, Khorasan, and Central Asia. Acknowledging this shift in power, the Khalifa al-Mansur wished to relocate his capital from Damascus in Syria. Imam Abu Hanifa was commissioned by the Khalifa to locate and plan a site for the new capital. Abu Hanifa chose the current location around a bend of the river Tigris, paying careful attention to defense and communications. There were no computers or computer-aided design in those days. obtain the concurrence of the Khalifa, Abu Hanifa marked out the geometrical layout of the planned capital on the ground, showing in detail the location of the palace, the mosque, the marketplace, the residential areas, and the fort. Then he sprinkled cotton seeds over the marked outlines, selecting a moonless night when there was little background radiation. Imam Abu Hanifa set fire to the cotton seeds. One of the characteristics of cotton seeds is that they contain a small amount of chromium and they radiate a brilliant light when they're burned. Using these burning cotton seeds as his guides, Imam Abu Hanifa showed the outline of the planned city to the Khalifa from a tower specially constructed for observation on the occasion. The Caliph was pleased and authorized the construction. Imam Abu Hanifa studied in the halakha of Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq and benefited from the spiritual knowledge transmitted through the Ahl Bayt. The school of jurisprudence named after him offers the greatest latitude to a jurist to formulate legal opinions to meet the requirements of changing times. The usul al-fiqh, or the principles of Hanafi fiqh, include the Quran, the Sunnah of the Prophet, the ijma, or the collective opinion of some, not necessarily all of the companions, qiyas, or analogy, and istihsan. The principles of qiyas and istihsan are available to the large number of Muslims who live in minorities in India, China, Europe, and America to apply the Sharia and deduce legal opinions that meet the requirements of the social, political, and economic context. The next slide, please. Of all the sciences that the Muslims came in contact with, it was Greek rational thought that caught their fancy, and they fell in love with its rigor and its precision. Aristotle became their hero and reason their guide. The Khalifa al-Mansur adopted and promoted Greek philosophy as core dogma. Muslim scholars set out to apply rational methods to physical phenomena, as well as social, cultural, and religious issues with excitement and enthusiasm. These scholars were called the Mutazilites. Al-Mansur established an academy called Baitul Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, where scholarly books from around the world were translated into Arabic. From India came the Siddhanta of Aryabhatta. From Greece came the works of Aristotle, Plato, and Hippocrates. From China came the technology for manufacturing porcelain and papermaking. And from Iran, the art of constructing windmills. Baitul Hikmah was a cosmopolitan academy. Among the scholars who worked there were Muslims, Christians, Jews, Hindus, and Zoroastrians. The application of classical Greek rational thought in an Islamic paradigm was not without its challenge. The Greeks assumed that time was, quote, eternal. The second issue was, quote, cause and effect in nature. There were other issues of disagreement as well, namely human free will, or ikhtiyar as we call it in Urdu, and man's responsibility for his actions. These assumptions, when applied to theological issues, presented profound and fundamental doctrinal challenges to Muslim scholars. Resistance set in, and it was led by Usuli Ulama, headed by none other than Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal. Faced with mounting public pressure, the later Abbasid Khalifas relented. In 846 CE, the Khalifa al-Mutawakkil disallowed the Mutazilites and banished them from his court. The next slide, please. The aftermath of the Mutazilites' convulsions influenced the development of natural sciences in the Islamic world in a profound way. The classical Islamic civilization that emerged in the post-Mutazilite period was scientific empirical. Indeed, the Muslims were arguably the originators of the empirical method, the scientific method. For more than 500 years, from 700 to 1258 CE, Muslim scientists were the torchbearers of knowledge, advancing human civilization with their discoveries and inventions. It was this light that awakened Europe from its slumber in the Dark Ages. Some of the noted scientists of the era include Al-Khwarizmi, after whom the word algorithm is named, the physician Al-Razi, who was the first to identify smallpox and communicable diseases, Al-Masudi, the empirical historian, Al-Biruni, whose book Kitabul Hind was a masterpiece about medieval India, the physician Ibn Sina, whose book Canons of Medicine was the standard textbook in Europe until the 16th century, Al-Idrisi, the geographer, Ibn Rushd, the philosopher, and the inventor, Al-Jazari, one of whose inventions, the camshaft shown here in the diagram, that converts linear motion into rotary motion, was one of the greatest inventions of humankind, similar in its import to the plow and the stirrup. This momentum towards a scientific culture was set back by the advent of Imam al-Ghazali towards the end of the 12th century. Basing his powerful dialectic in the earlier works of Ash'ari, al-Ghazali argued that there was no cause and effect in nature, and that all natural events happen by the will of God. Al-Ghazali's writings were carried far and wide through a chain of madrasas established by the powerful Seljuk dynasty and had a chilling effect on the pursuit of science in the Islamic world. His impact is to be felt in the thinking of the mullahs and the maulanas even to this day. Next slide, please. The word Sufi literally means a practitioner of tasawwuf, a term that derives from the Arabic root suf, swad, waw, fe, meaning purity. In the context of tasawwuf, it means purity of the heart or purity of the soul. Tasawwuf grew its roots and had solidified its position in the Islamic world when the Mongol cataclysm descended upon it in the 13th century. Genghis Khan obliterated a civilization. Centers of learning and culture like Samarkand and Bukhara, Nishapur, Herat, and Baghdad were obliterated. India was a beneficiary of the Mongol invasions. This is where the story of Islam in northern India begins. As the centers of learning burn in Central Asia, many of the Sufi sheikhs and scholars found refuge with the Sultanate of Delhi. If there is one word that captures the essence of how Islam captured the hearts of 1/3 of South Asia, it is love, muhibba, pyar. The key to the success of the Sufis lay in the spiritual bent of the Indian mind. Every culture produces an archetype that personifies the ethos of that culture. For instance, in contemporary America is the successful entrepreneur like Bill Gates. In the Dark Ages in Europe, it was the monk. In medieval Japan, it was Europe. It was samurai. In the Muslim Middle East, it was the traditionalist. In India, it was the sadhu and the rishi. The Sufi could intuitively and immediately relate to the Indian culture in a manner that the learned doctors of law could not. Thus, it was that the great Sufis not only succeeded in introducing millions of Indians to Islam, but also contributed to the evolution of a unique Hindustani language, culture, poetry, music, which amalgamated the ancient inheritance of India with the vibrancy of Islam. If the center of gravity of the Muslim world today is closer to Kuala Lumpur, Lucknow, and Lahore than to Cairo and Damascus, it is due not so much to the power of the sultans or the preaching of the mullahs, but to the spiritual approach of the Sufi sheikhs. Zaviyas, tikkas, and khankhas spread out throughout the subcontinent, offering seekers some spiritual knowledge, instruction, not just in the Quran and the Sunnah, but also fiqh, tasawwuf, history, languages, and mathematics. Well-known Zaviyas existed in Multan, Lahore, Delhi, Agra, Jaunpur, Patna, Murshidabad, and Sylhet. The training was individualized and personal, from a sheikh to the murid. The archetype of the age was a man of the spirit, like Sheikh Moinuddin Chishti of Ajmer, Baba Farid of Lahore, Sheikh Shamsuddin Yahya of Kashmir, Sheikh Jalal of Sylhet, and Gesu Daraz of the Deccan. Together, these men transformed the continent molded it in a spiritual crucible, lit the candle of faith in the hearts of millions, and laid the spiritual foundation for one of the richest and most powerful dynasties the world has ever known, namely the great Mughals of India. The emergence of Tasawwuf as a powerful force in the Indian milieu did not go unchallenged by competing ideas. The historian Barani describes an interesting confrontation between the Sufis and the Khazis in the magnificent Tughlaq courts in Old Delhi. The Khazis and the ulama sought a ban on sama, namely music, declaring it to be haram. To sort out these controversies, Ghayasuddin Tughlaq, Sultan of Delhi, convened a conference of the leading ulama, Khazis, and philosophers in Delhi at his court in 1320. Nizamuddin Awliya was also invited. What started at a conference turned into a court-martial of the Chishtiya Sufis. Khazi Jalaluddin, Chief Khazi of Delhi, and Sheikh Zada Jam argued against sama. Nizamuddin Awliya defended the practice, basing his arguments on certain ahadith. The discussion became heated, so the Sultan turned to Sheikh Ilmuddin, who was a philosopher, namely a Mutazilite, and had traveled extensively to Iran and Iraq and Syria and Egypt. Sheikh Ilmuddin answered that sama was halal for those who listened to it with their hearts, and was haram for those who heard it with their nafs. The emperor deliberated, and not to be drawn into a religious controversy, gave a split decision, permitting sama for the Chishtiya order, but forbidding it for the followers of the Qalandariya and the Haidari orders. Such antipathy towards music and other scientific disciplines persists in the religious circles of the subcontinent, even to this day. As a result, the graduates of the Islamic seminaries have no clue at all about electromagnetic theory, earthquakes, electron motion, Newtonian mechanics, or wind shear that brings down aircraft, all of which are based on harmonic or biharmonic equations. The next slide, please. Science and technology did not die out with the Mongol invasions. They shifted from the core Arab domains to the Indian, Turkish, and Maghrib periphery. The Ottoman, Safavid, and the Mughal empires rose in Eurasia, while Africa saw the advent of the great Songhai and Mali empires. Great centers of learning sprang up as far away as Timbuktu, Gao, and Kano in Africa, and Aceh in Indonesia. Isfahan, Istanbul, Delhi, Agra replaced Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad as centers of learning and culture. The world-renowned Ibn Battuta, the historian Ibn Khaldun, astronomers such as Ulugh Bey, master builders like Muhammad Sinan of the Ottoman Empire, and Ustad Ahmed, the architect of the Taj Mahal, were all products of this age. But perhaps the most convincing evidence of this position is offered by the rockets of Tipu Sultan. It comes as a surprise to many people that American national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, was inspired by the rockets invented by an Indian Muslim king, Tipu Sultan of Mysore. It was the year 1814. The Anglo-American War, which started in 1812, was in full swing. The British forces, after burning down Washington and conducting a raid on Alexandria, proceeded up the Chesapeake Bay to capture Fort McHenry in Baltimore. Caught in the crossfire were two American lawyers, Francis Scott Key and John Stuart Skinner, who had gone over to negotiate a truce and prisoner exchange with the British. Key and Skinner were allowed to board the British flagship and present their proposals to Major General Robert Ross. Since they had overheard the detailed war plans, Key and Skinner were held back by the British and were witness to the bombardment of Baltimore on September 13, 1814. Orange and red flashes of rocket fire illuminated the skies over Fort McHenry. The bombardment went on all night, and it was not clear as to which side would prevail in this clash of arms. At daybreak, as the first rays of the sun hit the fort and the fog lifted over the bay, the American flag was still aloft over Fort McHenry, fluttering in the morning breeze. This was the moving sight that inspired Francis Scott Key to compose the Star-Spangled Banner. The rockets used in the War of 1812 were a takeoff on the rockets captured by the British from Tipu Sultan of Mysore after the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War of 1799. The late Dr. Abdul Kalam, the architect of India's rocket programs, called Tipu Sultan the father of modern rocketry. When Tipu Sultan was martyred during the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War of 1799, the British sent some of the captured Mysore rockets to the Royal Laboratory in England. A development team led by Colonel Congreve back-engineered Tipu Sultan's rockets. That was cool, wasn't it? The modified Mysore rockets, renamed the Congreve rockets, were used against Napoleon at the Battle of Boulogne in 1806 and against the Americans in the assault on Baltimore in 1814. A solid propellant rocket is a system. It requires a host of technologies and a large number of subsystems. Tipu Sultan's achievement was to create an advanced technological ecosystem in the Kingdom of Mysore, which was a match for any in Europe or America, and in some respects was even more advanced. This included metallurgy, iron smelting, fine grain casting, precision boring, solid propellant physics, high energy material chemistry, packing, loading, use of composite materials, standardization, processes, manufacture, assembly, testing, and deployment of rockets. Tipu Sultan not only established the karkhanas or the factories for the production of rockets on a mass scale, but backed it up by establishing research laboratories in several forts and advanced schools for training of military engineers. The advances made by the rocket engineers of Tipu Sultan show that as late as the 18th century, technological developments in Asia were not far behind those in Europe. It was only in the 19th century that Europe acquired a decisive technological edge over Asia. Next slide, please. If the land empires of the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the great Mughals were so powerful and prosperous, what went wrong? Most noticeable was the delay in the introduction of the printing press, which was introduced into Germany in 1439 and spread throughout Europe by the end of the 15th century. In Italy alone, there were no less than 77 printing presses in the year 1500. The printing press made possible the spread of knowledge. It was one of the main engines for the Renaissance, which produced the likes of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. It was only in 1728 that the printing press was introduced into the Ottoman Empire. It was introduced in the Mughal India much later, at the beginning of the 19th century. In both cases, what held back the introduction of this technology was the opposition of the ulama, who held that the word of God would be defiled by contact with wooden presses. Indeed, the ulama increasingly became hostile to the basic sciences, which they did not understand. A case in point is the destruction of the Taqiyuddin Observatory in Istanbul, which was built in 1570 and destroyed in 1577 at the behest of the religious establishment, who suspected that the Ottoman defeat at the Battle of Lepanto in 1571 was somehow related to the ungodly pursuits of the astronomers. Next slide, please. Europe used its technological and scientific advantage to colonize much of Asia and Africa. India was the first great Asian civilization to fall to the West. The European powers dismantled the educational infrastructure of the colonized lands, which had grown over many centuries, thereby injecting a discontinuity in the intellectual development of the colonized people. The zawiyas and madrasas, which had provided the educational foundation of the Muslim world, were either marginalized or disappeared. Their place was taken up by government schools run by the colonial authorities, whose purpose was to educate the native population to man the lower echelons of the huge administrative bureaucracies in their colonized lands. science and technology, which at best were flickering in the old institutions, died out. The next slide, please. It was only in the latter half of the 19th century that the Islamic world woke up to the need to relearn the natural sciences from the West. In India, the Anglo-Mohammedan College, later to become the Aligarh Muslim University, was founded by Sir Syed Ahmed Khan. It was the genius of Sir Syed that he saw for the first time in history the possibility of cooperation between the West and the ancient civilizations of the East based on science and rational thought. In the Ottoman Empire, a determined effort was made to cultivate science and technology through the Tanzimat. However, from a global perspective, the Islamic world continues to lag behind the West in science and technology. Less than 1% of the names that appear in the database of the United States Patent and Trademark Office are Muslim. And a similar trend is observable in the respectable scientific journals of the West. Literacy amongst Muslims is amongst the lowest in the world. What is most alarming is that the education gap between Muslim communities and the emerging economies such as those of China is increasing. War, occupation, physical dislocation, and government neglect have all taken their toll. Meanwhile, Muslims continue to be bogged down with arguments or halal, haram, bidah, shirk, kufr, length of beards, and halal meat. In Pakistan and Afghanistan, women and girls are attacked for going to school. In India, girls are harassed for covering their heads out of modesty. The term alim is reserved for one who has studied in a madrasa. Scholarship in the sciences is not valued. Knowledge has been compartmentalized into dini talim and dunavi talim. The ignorant mullahs look down upon the natural sciences as a secular, Western, debasing endeavor. Clearly, a paradigm shift is needed. Next slide, please. Poverty is a curse on humankind. Poverty is a curse on humankind. Poverty breeds ignorance, and ignorance breeds poverty. Education provides an exit door from this vicious cycle. What drives education today is technology. If the subcontinent is to emerge from the clutches of mass poverty, it must pay attention to its education system. Develop a framework to encourage the pursuit of the natural sciences. Instead of engaging in endless disputes about what divides us, would it not be more productive if India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh evolved a common science curriculum for K through 12 and reinforced each other by sharing the best practices through technological networks? Dhaka and Calcutta, Bangalore and Hyderabad, Mumbai and Karachi, Delhi and Lahore would become the nodes for such a network. Let this be the day when we proposed in this forum the idea of a South Asian primary and secondary education network. Let's call it SAPNet. Influence government policy. Primary education is one of the first requisites of good governance. The governments of South Asia have washed their hands off of this responsibility. The privatization of primary education was one of the worst developments in post-independent India. K through 12 education should be free, universal, compulsory, and of the highest quality. Establish institutions. Encourage bright students to compete and pursue higher education. There are 80 million Muslims in the Gangetic Plain, stretching from Delhi to Calcutta. And I got this information from Dr. Razi the other day. While the rich use coaching and training to score high in competitive exams and get into good schools, the poor among the Muslims and the Dalits are left in the lurch. The admissions into IITs and IIMs speak for themselves. Introduce ethics into the school curriculum. Tarbiyah or tarbiyat is as important as ta'aleem. Train the religious establishment, the alims and the mullahs, in the basics of science and technology. The subcontinent has produced many great civilizations. Our hope is that it will once again rise up to the current challenges, renews itself, and will march forward with the light of knowledge. The path to that renewal lies in universal, compulsory, and free mass education of the highest quality, driven by technology, nourished by compassion and love, and governed by reason. Thank you.
Nazeer Saab, it's too overwhelming. It's so inspiring and so overwhelming. Now I invite Professor Bashir Ahmed for the concluding remarks, and thereafter we will start the question and answer session. Please, Bashir Saab. You have to unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum, greetings. Thanks, Professor Nazeer, for such an eloquent presentation on history of science and faith and Islamic education. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts for a few minutes as a closing remarks. I established an institution of medieval and post-medieval studies in 2001 to disseminate the information on the Muslim contribution to world civilization, because I found many Muslims and non-Muslims were not aware of their contribution to the world of civilization. And during last 15, 20 years, I have been studying the rise and fall of the Muslim civilization. And today, in next few minutes, I want to share my perception or what did go wrong. Muslims, when they expanded their state in Egypt, Baghdad, Syria, and part of Roman Empire, they come across the vast knowledge on philosophy, astronomy, sciences, which they were never aware. They become very fascinated. At the same time, they got inspiration from Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that ponder, explore my creation. And even the first verse is talking about the Iqra Bismi Rabbika, about the ilm in the name of God. And I won't go into details about the verses, but there were several hundred verses promoting the desire to seek knowledge. Our Prophet, peace be upon him, also insisted that knowledge is important, and he mentioned that even to go to China is necessary to knowledge, you should do that. So that's how they become very fascinated, and they started studying. Khalifa Abbas, during Abbasiyat Khilafat, during the 7th, 8th, 9th century, also promoted the spirit of seeking knowledge, and they were instrumental in establishing the world's first institution called House of Wisdom, which was like a university itself, where the first task was to translate every book they had in Greek, Latin, Indian languages, translated into Arabic. Once they did that, and Muslims started studying, in next 100 to 200 years, they become masters in every field of science, technology, philosophy, geography, astronomy, you name the subject. In fact, I was reading one article from American historian who stated that if there would have been a Nobel Prize in the fields of science, technology, philosophy, and astronomy, every Nobel Prize would have gone to Muslims between 800 and 1500 century, between 8th to 15th century. So that's the extent of the knowledge they had. They established great teaching institution in the Islamic world. Students from all over the world were coming to Baghdad, Iran, Uzbekistan, Cordoba to study. They wrote books and thousands of books. And some of their books become standard textbook of medicine in European and Eastern and Western part of the world for almost 500 years, from 1000 to 16th century. Now, they have so much influence on the Europeans that they started studying science, and it is said that the Muslims are responsible to develop the foundation for the European Renaissance. However, I found that in 12th century, there was a movement which discredited the teaching of science and philosophy. Theologians were concerned that if Muslims study science and philosophy, they will deviate from religion. Their iman and their faith become weak. Although the Muslim scholars show a strong faith in God and they were good Muslims, but somehow that idea is spread. Another major thing happened in 12th century is that Abbasi Khilafat started losing power. Seljuk Khalifa were gaining power, and Seljuk Khalifa were told that if Muslims study philosophy, science, they may question the Khilafat itself and they may promote democracy. So to preserve the Khilafat, it is better to stop that. That movement got a big momentum, and in 200 years, this is something very serious. In the entire Muslim world, the education of science and technology was stopped. All these great universities, which were producing such great scholars, stopped that. That's the reason from 15th century until 20th century, you have not seen a single book written by a Muslim scientist, a single discovery made by Muslim scientists, maybe isolated examples. While the Europe was progressing with leaps and bounds with the technology, new scientific advances, Muslims were in hibernation. We had great empires, Ottoman Empire, Safavid Empire, Mughal Empire. They were still controlling a large part of the Muslim world, but they never paid attention to the education. As a result of that, they become very weak. And the Europeans took 50 to 100 years to control the entire Muslim world from Algeria to Far East Indonesia. There was not a single Muslim country remained independent. So this was the unfortunate history. And the concluding remark, I must say that Muslims are still preoccupied with the same thinking. Unless the basic thinking is changed, we cannot bring the change. Just to give an example, in this progressive country, USA, we have hundreds of Islamic seminaries. Can you tell me how many seminaries are concentrating teaching science and technology? None. And that's the reason my concluding remark is that it is time for Muslims to waken up and change the misconception that studying the science and philosophy will weaken the faith, and give importance to scientific technology so we can attain the same level of intellectual capabilities we have before 15th century. I'm very thankful to you for giving me the opportunity for a few minutes, and I will conclude with that. And I hope if there is a question, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Now the second part, we'll start with question and answer session. But before that, if the moderator of this second part, the question and answer session allows me, I would like to have first question because it is at the last sentence of Nazeer Saab that draws me to put this question. So before that, here is the coming Saturday talk by a very well-known professor here in America who has been a speaker before, Professor Barbara Metcalf from California. And she's going to talk on Begums of Bhopal, becoming a Muslim woman in colonial India, especially two Begums, well-known Shah Jahan Begum, and
my Begum.
And she will be, Professor Barbara Metcalf will be introduced by her colleague and friend, Dr. Mozam Siddiqui Saab. And the concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Raza Khan, who is a research fellow in Germany. So let's move to the question and answer session, which will be moderated by our host, Dr. Rafat Hussain. And as I requested, Rafat, if you can allow me, I have
you will be the first one. So hold on.
Because it relates to today's talk in a way which we are also somehow pursuing some part of that. So Dr. Nazeer Saab, at the end, with all the glorious past and all those things that a lot of us now know, the real scenario you showed, what is going on around us in Indian subcontinent, in particular India. And you mentioned about my statement. Yes, there is a big question why in India Muslims are so much backward in education, and why there is no such movement, why we have not taken any lead from all lettered scholars. And in particular, I'm concerned with the North Indian Muslim situation. As you said, 80 million Muslims and 250 million rest other Indians live in this stretch. And there are not very many, or actually none, volunteer organizations or institutions which can provide them quality competitive centers or other provisions to excel, make them competitive to the more affluent class. So there is this new kind of caste or category sectionized that a upper class people, affluent people can go to all competitive exams and qualify. But the poor, bright students cannot do anything. Special cases, Muslims, 80 million Muslims in North Indian belt between Calcutta to Delhi. There is not a single institution which provides the marginalized, bright students any kind of center, any kind of hope, except them to go to secondary institution to become clerks and peons or any other subclass. But their affluent section of the society can get hold of all the. So can you shed some light on that?
It's a very apt and correct observation, Razi Sahab. The education system in India is broken. It is a reflection of the global centration that we have. The haves have it. The have-nots do not have it. I focus my attention on Muslims only because that was the topic of my discussion. What I say is equally applicable to the poor people in the other communities too. If we start with the primary education, that is broken. If we fix primary education, it would benefit the poor people, especially the Muslims, because they are amongst the poorest of the poor. And as you rightly point out, if we look at northern India as compared to southern India, northern India, which was so much impacted and was devastated by the trauma of partition, we find the scarcity of good centers of excellence wherein the able students, those who are able to compete at the higher levels for IIT and IIM seats and so on, go on become the leaders of the technological revolution. There is no opportunity for them. So there is a great need for them. I think if we pay attention to it and start thinking along those lines, establish a center of two, perhaps in Lucknow, Delhi, Patna, Calcutta, it would be a step in the right direction.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before we go for further question and answer, please allow me to thank Professor Nazeer Ahmed for enlightening talk, and Professor Ejaz Naqvi or Dr. Ejaz Naqvi for wonderful introduction, and Dr. Bashir Ahmed for a beautiful concluding remark. So as you all know, there are options of either raising the hand, digital hand, or you show your interest in chat box. So far, I don't see anyone raised a hand or asking a question, although there are few comments over there.
Rafat, there are 4 hands.
Excuse me, Abdul Jabbar and Saeed Amir.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Can I go ahead right now?
Yes, Abdul Jabbar Sahab, you are the first one.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Oh, wonderful, fantastic presentation. Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. So I posted the statement by Richard Lewontin in the chat. This is the book they wrote in 1985. This is about the eugenic, this particular statement. You can read, I can read it. So you touched on that, you know, the rise of the people of Arabia, Maghreb, in the hundreds of years following the Hijrah from a poor, backward, pastoral, local mature society, the great civilization of Mediterranean Islam, preeminent in poetry, mathematics, science, and political power, can only be explained in a change of gene frequencies. So he was the opponent of the eugenics movement in the Europe during the Hitler era, also percolated into the American intellectual circle. So can you kind of touch on this movement, how it's really impacted on the backward, kind of the European way of thinking, how they have kind of put down people based on different, on the color, other religious backgrounds. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Well, first of all, going back to the 6th century, what enabled the Arabs to become the leaders at that time of the world in knowledge was education, knowledge. It was knowledge driven. If you look at the history of Baghdad between the years 700 and 900, there were so many luminaries, and also such great scholars in the area of jurisprudence, in the area of science, technology, mathematics, philosophy, and so on. If you shift to Europe, Europe took a different path. In the 12th century, they dissociated the pursuit of science and technology from religion. That enabled them to make their own assumptions about the nature of science and move forward. And hence, science and technology became secular. It has its own consequences. A secular world has no color, it has no taste, it doesn't talk to us, and hence modern man finds himself dangling between heaven and earth. That the Islamic world took a different path from that. They tried to somehow bring the two together, and in the process fell flat on their face also in the 12th century, made errors. Now a fresh attempt has to be made to bring science and faith together. There is no such thing as double knowledge, two knowledge. Knowledge is one, whether it is science or faith or philosophy or any other methodology, we all strive for the same knowledge. So a fresh attempt has to be made, has been made, bring it together so that as human beings, we advance towards a vista that combines the beauty of the heart with the prowess of the mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. I kind of add whether this eugenic movement also percolated into the Islamic culture. So putting down on within the Islamic segment of the population, whether there is an attempt, unconsciously, consciously attempt to kind of divide people based on what they look, how they, that is also very important to the discussion, I think. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, there is tension. There are tensions within the Islamic body politic. And these tensions are also obvious in the Indian Islamic body politic. There are pressures from different quarters. I alluded to some of those pressures, the pressures of centration, the pressures of Islamophobia, the pressures of Hindutva, the pressures due to the internal tensions because of our own history. Now, where we are at the present time, it so happens that the religious establishment is inimical to science and technology because they don't understand it. They need to understand science and technology so that we can move. For instance, if we can transform the thousands of madrasas that we have in Uttar Pradesh, there is a madrasa practically in every street corner there. If we can transform them in the light of rational thought, science and technology, combining the ethos, the beauty of the heart that faith teaches with the rationalism, the philosophy, the progress that science and technology teach, then I think we'll have something to do. Yes, there are tensions and the work is cut out for us and for everybody too.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Sayyid Amir Saab, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't have expertise on Indian Muslims, but based on my limited knowledge, I want to share a couple of observations. First of all, only 3.9% of the Muslims have higher education, and for women, it's only 0.8, whereas although there are a lot of poor Hindu Indians too, but still the percentage is much higher. 11.5% of men are educated and 1.8, which is 4 times more higher percentage than Muslims. There is no question that poverty is the major reason, discrimination is major reason, lack of government attention is major reason, but I want to make a serious suggestion for this noble body to consider. We have about 24,000 madrasas in India alone. They are run by Jamiyat-e-Islami Hind, which is mostly I understand, mostly Deobandi madrasas. They teach 100% Islamic education, nothing scientific. I strongly recommend they should go back to early Islamic period where there was no distinction from Islamic and secular education. There was integrated. People receive both Islamic and secular education, the same institution teaching them morals, ethics, and Islamic philosophy. So that's number one. How to convince these leaders, it is an impossible task, because I understand several efforts have been made, but they do not want to change their curriculum, and their curriculum reflected what was devised by Nizamiya schools in 11th century. So in last 600, 700, 800 years, there was no change in it. Now, all these schools are run by public money. They get the donations. So somehow, if there is a movement that if the donors can insist that unless they change the mode of education, introduce regular sciences, they will not get donation, I think that's a possibility. But the problem is the people who donate, they are told your donation is a gateway to Jannat. And I think people find it's easier just to donate and get the sawab forever. And that's the kind of a tendency we need to change, where we need to show that scientific education is serving humanity. All the conveniences of today we are seeing, whether air condition, cell phones, airplane, everything which is serving humanity is because of the scientific education. And Indian Muslims should be part of that. So here is my humble suggestion. They should be told that 80% education should be scientific, 20% should be
all right, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Amir Bhai.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Nazeer Ahmed. I am familiar some of your work through the pages of Pakistan Link. Your work appears there regularly. If I could take you back to what in your talk about the Middle Ages, I consider the extinction of Mu'tazila and their philosophy was a loss. And Imam Ghazali, I think, was contributed quite a bit to that. And the controversy between him and Ibn Rushd in Cordoba, I think, is very useful for any scholar to study. So I think that was one of the reasons. Now, for some reason, it seems you did mention it, but I don't find much evidence that much scientific progress was happening in India. All these travelers, which we see, especially during the later Mughal period, Sir Thomas Roe and the ones who came in the Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb period, they comment on everything except any educational opportunities. Even going back to Ibn Battuta, as you mentioned, there was no great discussion of any scientific or scholarly work going on during Tughlaq regime. So finally, I think another problem now, apart from everything else, is the Muslim countries in general, and I'm a little bit more familiar with Pakistan, there's no freedom of thought. All the freedom of expression and thought has been throttled. And that is not conducive to the progress of science or scholarly work. Thank you.
Good observations, sound observations. A couple of very quick comments. While it's true that the scientific developments in the Ottoman Empire, the Mughal Empire, or the Safavid empires were not as noticeable as they were between the years 700 and 1250, Mughal India did have a very vibrant technology culture. I bring to your attention the following. For instance, the invention of the composite bow. The composite bow that the Mughals used was every bit as good as the best bows that were available in England at the time. Indeed, the same principle is used in advanced composites today in the construction of, for instance, we use them in the F-18 aircraft and some of the space vehicles that we build, composite construction. Secondly, the invention of multi-barrel guns that were used by the Mughals that were not known anywhere else in the world. Third, I have spoken about rockets, although that came about later. The Mughals also were known to know rockets. It's a very subtle science, not difficult, but very difficult to. And then the muslin cloth, for instance, to pay attention to other things, of Dhaka, the Europeans, the nobility considered it a privilege to buy a few yards of muslin cloth and cover themselves up with it. Maulana Nadvi wrote a little manuscript called Hindustan Ki Purani Darsgahein. And in my old days, when I used to go to Delhi, I used to wander around the Jamia Masjid and the bazaars, pick up a pamphlet or old pamphlet or two. I believe this was published by Shibli Academy somewhere around 1940 or so. In it, he describes Hindustan Ki Purani Darsgahein. And he gives a detailed account of what was taught in the Mughal Empire and how the madrasa gradually shrunk the syllabus all the way from the very comprehensive syllabus that they used to have at the time of the Mughals to what it is today. I would highly recommend, if you have a chance to read it, Hindustan Ki Purani Darsgahein, a little small manuscript, about 25 pages or so.
Thank you. Amin Ahmed Saab and then Ajaz Naqvi Saab. Amin Ahmed Saab from Canada.
Sir, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Sir, thank you for the brilliant presentation and in particular for highlighting the rockets of Tipu Sultan. Mysorean rockets, as we know, they competed with the latest European industrial revolution, arms innovations like the solid bore cannon technology, which was the latest technology in those days. Now, these rockets may have been developed using the knowledge bank, collective knowledge bank of Indians, both Hindus and Muslims. And now, as far as the Muslims, we know that there were no engineering and science schools those days. And, these people who may have, contributed to these rockets, they may have gained their education in madrasas. Now, my question is, what went wrong post 1799 after Tipu's death in Mysore Kingdom? Why did Muslims lose out in science and math? And how do we undo those mistakes? Thank you.
Well, it's very clear. You lost your political power. You lost control over the educational process. See, it is not quite correct to say that science and technology, not science as we know it in the West, but technology was not taught in the Islamic madrasas. Again, I refer you back to the syllabus, the detailed discussion that Maulana Nadvi, great scholar, offers insights into what was taught during the Mughal period and later too. They had schools, there are layers of schools. There was the madrasa, there was the maktab, there was the academies, there were the military schools, and there were also research laboratories in the arsenals, both Mughal arsenals and in the regional arsenals too. What happened later? You lost control of the political process. You lost control of your syllabus. You lost control of your language. Farsi first was displaced and English was replaced. And after English, other things have happened. So when you lose control, gradually, the madrasa became a caricature of what it was before. Until now, they teach you only the Quran and Hadith, the Sunnah, a little bit of history, the first few years of the Prophet's life and so on. Gone is the education about civics, mathematics, philosophy, Hinsa. Oration is taught, but not as much, etc. All those subjects are gone. That's what happened. We lost the political thing. And now what we have to do is to get back to it. The world has marched on. We have to learn from wherever we can learn, as the Prophet taught us to do. Learn from the West, learn from China, learn from Delhi, learn from IITs, learn wherever you can. We need to change our thinking. What has happened is we have boxed ourselves in Dini Talim, Dunawi Talim, shunted ourselves off. We need to open the door and let the light in.
Thank you. Naqvi Saab.
Yeah, but thank you. So it's been a beautiful conversation and of course a beautiful lecture by Dr. Nazeer. So a couple of comments. One is that I think if we look at when the Muslims were kind of this epicenter of knowledge, there were a couple of things. One is I think the attachment to Quran. And I think one of the reasons why we have moved away from it, because we have detached ourselves from the Quran. And whenever we say we are attached to the Quran, it's really lip service. And then the attachment to Quran simply is when you're reciting, getting the reward, which is true, but that's not why the Quran was revealed. It was for guidance. And if we had contemplated and pondered over the verses of the Quran, we would have found out, as the Quran actually invites us repeatedly to ponder, to contemplate, to think. Many verses start by saying, like, do you not see? And there are, references to the Big Bang, when the earth and the heavens were joined together and they were split asunder, or the universe that is expanding, or the universe was a smoke. These are all verses from the Quran. This is not what I'm saying. Or the plant kingdom. The word that's used is when God and Allah created the plants, it talks about the azwaj, which is the word we use for female and male couples. So, and we later found out that there are actually male plants and there are female plants, and there's sex, in addition to the asexual reproduction, there's sexual reproduction. But because we only gave lip service to the Quran, we actually lost out on that. So one critical piece that is missing from our education system is critical thinking. And I think, and when we go back to the golden age, they actually emphasize on the critical thinking. I think Sayyid Amir Saab may have alluded to that, is that the thought process, the critical thinking, even if you said religious matter, that's missing. So I personally don't have any problems with madrasas only doing Islamic education. If that's their specialty, fine. There are schools that say focus on fine art. There are schools that focus on engineering and medicine. That's fine. My main issue is they are not using critical thinking even in Islamic education, and teaching with an open mind, the capacity to question, to ponder. I think that's missing. So those were a couple of my comments, but I'm actually going to ask a question, even though I was not supposed to ask questions today.
Why not?
Is that if you look back at the golden age or any other age, there were 3 or 4 commonalities. The focus on education and knowledge, of course, but there were also a period or periods of economic growth. People were generally prosperous. So prosperity, good education, and also power. So they were all powerful also. Would you shed some light on this interplay between education, even actually today's world? If you look at where the education is, you'll also see prosperity and also power. Where's the link, interplay between education, economical prosperity, and power, political and military?
Dr. Saab, it's obvious. Knowledge is power. And all we have to do is to correlate. For instance, if we look at today's world, find out where the knowledge is and where the power is. Knowledge is power. Knowledge enables humankind to conquer the world and serve humankind and serve God. If you don't have the knowledge, then you're unable to do it. So the thing that distinguished that period, the brilliant period for 500 years, was their attitude towards knowledge, and knowledge in the sense of hikmah, namely integrative knowledge that included knowledge of the soul, knowledge of the spirit, knowledge of the heart, knowledge of the mind. Each of those different modes of learning were emphasized, and they excelled in all of those. So all we have to do is to compare ourselves today as to where we are in terms of our knowledge of the soul. We discard it. Where are we in terms of knowledge of the mind, poverty, whatever the reasons are, we cannot compete. Where are we in our knowledge of the spirit, as you rightly point out? Do we really critically study the Quran with a critical mind? No, 1/4 of the Quran is nature, study of the nature. So it's knowledge. The differentiator was knowledge. And if there's some way, when I say we, I just don't mean the Muslims. Any poor person, all the poor people, and it applies to all of us in the poverty-ridden people in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and so on. If we are to get rid of poverty, acquire knowledge. And that's the reason I emphasize primary education. That is the key. Fix primary education. Put pressure upon the governments to fix the primary education, make it universal, compulsory, and available to everyone.
Thank you. So there are many people lined up, so please be brief. And answering question, and of course, should be a question, directed question. Shrikant Chopra Saab and then Imtiaz Saab. Chopra Saab, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please.
Yes. I'm a newcomer to the forum and enjoyed very much. I've been listening to the programs over the last few months. I would want to ask a question. We have diagnosed a problem that young children are not getting good education. There is the reason behind that, well elucidated by today's speaker as well. The issue of religion, the issue of Maulanas, the issue of madrasas. What are we going to do about it? That's my concern. We have diagnosed a problem. What's the treatment? How to proceed to rectify it? As a physician, I look at a patient, I assess the patient, I make a diagnosis, then I treat the patient. So we keep on going back again and again in these conversations and other forums too. We diagnose a problem, but we do not come up with a clear, well thought out proposal to change the basic reality on the ground, because that's the most difficult part. So I want to hear about that if anybody has an answer to that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's an excellent question. The answer lies in training the ulama and the mullahs. The example of Sisodia in Delhi offers a good example. I met him in 2014, offered our solution for technology-based instruction in Delhi. They went a different way. What they did was to focus on the headmasters, the key people in the chain of transmission of knowledge. They sent them to England, they sent them to other parts of the world, and they brought back the methods of doing, imparting education from England and other places to Delhi. And they have done so well that their public education system in Delhi is better than the private education system. Similarly, we need to train the ulamas and the mullahs in science and technology, show them that indeed science and technology are not antagonistic to faith, but they form an integral part of faith. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. Imtiaz Saab and Tariq Azam Saab. Imtiaz Saab, please.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Nazeer Sahab, for a very scholarly and informative presentation. My question is concerning the mindset of Muslims, especially in North India. 160 years ago, Sir Syed lamented that the Muslims were in deep slumber, and if he tries to wake them up, they will turn around and refuse to wake up. Iqbal commented about 100 years ago, ye ghadi mahshar ki hai, tu arsae mahshar mein hai. That ghadi is even worse now. What would shake the Muslims of North India to come out of the slumber and realize the severe challenges they are facing?
Good question. Once again, North India suffered additional hits since the time of Sir Syed. Partition was a major hit. We all know what happened. What we need to do is to take a fresh look at the opportunities and the challenges that we face as we do, whether we are doctors or engineers or scientists, the same approach. What are the challenges? What are the drawbacks? What is holding us back? Take advantage of the opportunities that we have. I've offered some ways of doing it. One is to pay attention to the primary education. If K through 12 is available to every child, I believe that all the poor people in India, especially in Northern India, whether they be Dalit or Muslim or whatever faith, doesn't matter who they are, it will be good for us. That's one suggestion. The other suggestion is we need to change our thinking. We need to talk to the...
Hold on. Okay, go ahead, please.
We need to train the ulama the mullahs, because they control the microphone. They have access to the ears of the believers once a week for a half hour, uninterrupted, something that no politician, no statesman, no orator has the privilege of. So we need to change their mindset, take advantage of the opportunities the government offers, pay attention to primary education, and also selectively help some of the more gifted students to move forward and compete.
Thank you. Tariq Azam Saab, and then Ibrahim Sayyed.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening from India. I thank you very much, Professor Nazeer Ahmed Saab, for a bird's eye view of Muslim history. But unfortunately, a lot of Muslims are still living in the history. The action is on the ground here. We are talking about North India in the context of North India. And you guys rightly pointed out there are 80 million or more, probably in my estimate, 100 million from Delhi to Assam. I spent about 4 to 5 months in India. I live in Malaysia, basically, on the ground. I wonder really how many of you have visited India in the last 3, 4, or 5 years and really spent time what is happening here. Let me give you a little picture.
No, please go for question.
Okay, so the solution was, as Professor Nazeer said, is the fixing of primary education. Now, who is going to fix the primary education? You expect the BJP government to fix? They have been reducing the educational budget for a number of years. Today, 52% of the educational budget is spent on 200 institutes of national importance. The rest of the education system gets 48. How are you going to fix that? You need to put your money where your mouth is.
Understood.
The community has to spend and find a solution for that. Please.
Thank you.
Give us a solution for that.
Well, excellent observation. The solution is public pressure. You're absolutely right. I was a member of the Legislative Assembly myself. I know where the budget goes and where the money goes. So knowing the situation as is, what is the solution? What are not the solution? What are the alternatives? Who is going to change that? Who is going to change it is the public. There has to be public pressure. Select and elect those representatives who are going to fix that education system, because the people who benefit from what exists today are the very people who are in the legislatures themselves. So I see no alternative but public pressure, both internally in India and for us here too. Let's work on improving the education system in India. Gradual, but I don't see any other alternative.
Thank you. Ibrahim Sayyed Saab.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and congratulations to Brother Nazeer. I have a solution. The solution is to establish free schools, colleges, and universities. Free. No admission, no tuition, no boarding, and no lodging fee. And it can be done because in Bangalore, our Azim Premji has established a university. And also we have very rich institutions, commercial companies such as Himalaya, Cipla, pharmaceutical company. And these people can take the initiative to establish free schools, colleges, and universities. And also this can be done at international level. The petroleum producing countries can establish international free universities on science and technology. And they can admit students on merit coming from all over the world. Even they can pay for airfare, return airfare. So this is possible. So instead of thinking, you know, it can be done practically. It is possible.
Thank you.
That's my have the confidence. Thank you.
Okay, anyone wants to comment on this? Was the last question, and then go ahead, Bashir sir. Bashir Saab, unmute yourself.
Okay.
Yes.
I hope you understand. Dr. Nazeer, I understand that we need to educate mullahs. I think that's next to impossible task because my understanding is still 90% of the Muslims strongly follow Asharite doctrine. They are not Mutazilites. They are not going to be because all the seminaries, all the schools, Islamic schools are teaching Asharite and Hanbali logic. They are not going to be Mutazilites. So there are two choices. Unless public is educated about the real Islam, what really Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ne Quran mein kaha hai, or what Prophet said, the importance of education and change the Muslim mind, that will not happen. Second thing is, Dr. Syed just mentioned that you have to have the parallel school system where free boarding, lodging, education. Also, it requires a lot of money, but that may be another answer to beat the mullahs' schools and stop their funding. Unless there is a pressure from public for the mullahs that they will stop funding until they change the curriculum, this will never change. That's, I'm sorry, that's the way. Now, what is available is, like, I'm sure a lot of you heard about Khan Academy. They have free scientific education system and they can send to anywhere in the world. It's free. There are online systems, even I think Islamic institutions in India is promoting. It's available. So the lot of opportunities are available. But I just heard one thing, and maybe Dr. Nazeer, you might know more about it. In Kerala, I understand that the Islamic schools have begun to change. They are now paying more than 50% time to the secular education and less than 40% time to Islamic education. So the integrated education system will produce better students. The last comment I like to mention, look at the countries, Korea, China, Taiwan, Singapore, all of them got independence after India, Pakistan, and many Muslim countries. But where they are, because of their technological development, they are producing 90% of the product. Where Muslim countries are, we don't produce even 5% of product. Unless we have a massive education in the Muslim countries, that this is necessary, I think it will not change. I just like to conclude by saying that I just finished the book, and kindly Professor Nazeer Ahmed put the forward, Rise and Fall of Muslim Civilization, Hope for the Future. And I have 2 chapters devoted on what can be done to improve. So I hope when it is published, I will share with you and you will find some solutions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So please allow me to ask the question as well. So I know we focused on the Muslim education, but I see a different problem. I see that Indian education system is broken because even the IITians have no discovery or no Nobel Prize unless they move out of the country. Or we have some example, 2 or 3 examples who got the Nobel Prize in science and technology. So the problem we know is focused on the mullahs. And the second thing I wanted to say, although knowledge is, as Nazeer Saab said, knowledge is a power, but I believe, and some may not agree, I believe that this is a digression. Knowledge of faith is a digression not to have at least the science and technology discoveries among Muslims or even among Indians. So is there, and I know we are focusing on the primary education and it will take a while, a generation to have some discoveries. So the scientists who are already there or the educated people in India, even the Muslims, I'm talking about the Muslim all over the world. If the Muslims, is there any succinct formula which may create the critical thinking, as Ajaz Saab said, that we lack the critical thinking? I believe the entire Indian education system is a rectification, memorization, and even the IIT, and I watched a serial, it's called Quota Factory. And if you watch how much they go through it to get the competitive exam. So there is something fundamentally wrong in entire Indian education. So that's one thing. So Nazeer Saab or anyone, is there any formula you can prescribe which can make the people, those who are already a scientist, to have some meaningful discoveries? Thank you.
Gee, if there was a formula, we would have used it. Unfortunately, in life, we only have alternatives and possibilities. Just as a very brief comment, prelude to my answer, we should take credit for what we have done. When I first came to the United States back in 1960, 1961, people used to look down upon us. We had nothing. About 100 of us used to come from India. Everybody had a quota. And 100 scientists, some of us went back, some of us stayed here. What we have achieved, all we have to do is to look at the IT industry. It's commendable. People don't laugh at us anymore. They say, well, the Indians, they have done a good job. That's number one. But having said that, there's only a trickle what gets through the system. And anything is a composite of people, technology, and structure. Is our structure sound? No. Are the people supportive of education the way they should be? No. Or is the technology that we have in India on par with the best in the world? In some areas there is, but in most areas it is not. So I wish there was a formula. I have spent a great deal of time. My submission to you is the following, that as people here in the diaspora, we should work with people in India, with the government of India, with whoever it is who wants to listen to us, fix that primary education. It will be not immediately, but within a generation, be of immense benefit to India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. We talked about India. Pakistan is even in a worse position, education than we are. That's my submission.
So just a last comment, because I met one of the IITian. He said, okay, all the people from India who are working in IT industry, all the discoveries or innovations are made by white people. They just follow it and they implement it. So we know we have a big IT force, but it's not a critical thinkers force. That's what I am told by the IT people, those who visit from US to here. They just apply the knowledge already created by the others. Thank you so much. And that concludes the question and answer session. And I once again thank all three speakers. They were wonderful and it was a great discussion. I wish there was a simple formula. And I don't see, I am very, at least realist in this sense that I don't see a very quick.
There are two more hands I see. I don't know if there's time.
Or so let me see, because people. Okay, Javed Saab, you want to ask the question? Javed Saab, please be brief. That's the only hand I see.
Assalamu alaikum and Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. Let me, because I live in the United States and I'm also one of the board members and founders of a Ruya Foundation. And I conclude with all of your comments, but the thing is this, we need to start teaching our ulemas. Now, Ruya Foundation is giving scholarships here. So ulemas and muftis to go to colleges. For instance, we have one graduate who graduated from Columbia. The other one is now going to Irvine. And we are, our criteria is to teach them in contemporary sciences subjects. So when they are on the pulpit, when they are on the minbar, they can relate to the young next generation with context of Islam, Quran, and Hadith. So when the young kids ask question that scientific question that does this Islam says this, so they can relate, because our ulemas were only in a very tunnel vision in the past. Today we need to increase our focus. So what I'm trying to say is that our mindset has to change in teaching the muftis first, who declare fatwas and all those, and then trickle down to the Maulanas and Khatibs. When they speak on Fridays, they need to give at least 5 to 10 minutes, talk about sciences versus Islam. So when you are talking on the member, you're going to change the mindset of the community. I'm being very brief to the Islamic community. Okay. It can be done for any religious. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I can just comment. Yeah, Bashir Sahab, I give you a chance.
Yeah, just minor comment on what Iftikhar Sahab just said. Yesterday, I attended the khutbah, and the entire khutbah was how important it is that we have to see the moon visually, not trust science. So I think we have a very difficult battle.
Let's not deviate.
Thank you.
So yeah, you are right. I have been attending the khutbahs and even writing the summaries. And what they do, they just pick up one ayah and then elaborate it. And what Javed Saab saying is not going to work. But anyway, thank you. Back to you.
Yes, our focus is actually more on Muslims' education in the modern era, or the secular education, technical education. That is the focus. And let's take out American scenario, because here most Muslim students are really doing well or trying. They are not influenced by Maulanas on Fridays. I mean, rarely that is not the practical thing that is happening. So the issue here, Nazeer Saab and all other Bashir Saab and Naqvi Saab, the issue here is really to focus how to improve the professional skills or excellence or competitive excellence of those who are bright but are marginalized and not getting any resources to compete with the affluent class. That is really the issue in India or maybe subcontinent. When we talk about grand schemes of we can establish big institutions, free education, all those, we are not going to do that. Let's do the ground realities. We are very, titar-bitar people. We don't have a centralized any leadership here. We don't even talk to each other so nicely in a constructive manner. We don't have education fund. We don't have a vision or any roadmap. This Indian Muslim community or the Pakistani Muslim community, in 50 years, they couldn't come up with a single program except, listening to musharas or other things. This is all we are seduced with. So serious talk is about sitting here as professionals and competent people with some resources here or in Middle East maybe. These Indian Muslims continuous cry, continuous get frustrated and all those, but at the same time, they utterly fail to even put 2 cents in a national maybe education fund for improving the life of, literally what they do is there, Nazeer Saab, is there an Indian Muslim education fund created in America, North America, for the sake of bright students, Muslim students in India? No, it is not there. Either maybe led by some organization for caring to a certain section in the certain region. We don't have any plan to improve lives of anybody there. We talk, maybe sends a few dollars to a scholarship or something, but this is not what we are talking. We are talking about how to improve the lives of 80 million people. Not a single, can you believe this? Why we are in such a bad situation? 80 million Muslims between Calcutta to Delhi, majority of the poor Muslims. The affluent Muslim, 5%, 10%, they are getting well. There's no problem. We are talking about those. Not a single volunteer organization in this stretch which is providing this kind of guidance and resources to the kids of those 80 million families who can compete with 5%, 10%, 20% people. There is not a single. There must be something utterly wrong with us. So we talk about grand. We should not talk about any grand thing at all. Because when we cannot do a minimum thing, we shouldn't talk about grand thing at all. Yeah, we cannot. Because this, go to any district, it's a broken. Forget about Azamgarh or some other islands, you know, that is not an example. The example, go to Gonda, go to Basti, go to anywhere, Devariya, go to even central UP, go to western UP. There are no education institutions. There are no bright kids there. There's no guidance. There is nobody coming out for any kind of competitive exams, any kind of thing. Schools are broken. Third-rate schools. The Muslim-led schools managements are so corrupt, they don't produce anything. So there is utterly wrong, something wrong with us. And it is not that we are very religious also. You go to Muslim population center and see how much mosque is filled now. 10% of the population is in the mosque. What they do, they don't go in anything. Neither on religiously, they are fine, neither on secular work. They're not doing anything. We just are rested in our own being. I mean, this is how I see, and I feel very frustrated with that, really. But frustration is not the solution. We must do even a drop in the ocean, maybe a few drops, maybe more than a drop. The drop becomes a bucket, and the bucket becomes something eventually, but we should do something. But
unless the education system in India doesn't change, or for Muslims anywhere. And
well, we are not talking about ITs. We are not talking about we are not in that position to influence the government or these governments.
Right.
But if we can just make this realization that they are not going to help. Okay, why don't we think this way also? Okay, we live in the air, but we are not getting any help, or we are not going to get any help. Yeah. Can we create an alternative scenario, please, that if we cannot get any help, how can we do anything on any small scale? And then make things better on a larger scale. But why we keep on saying this? We cannot change anything. Even the normal, regular Hindus cannot change anything in India. So how can we, the marginalized one, can change? So can we have anything collectively, our intellectual pool, our monetary pool, our anything, to create some kind of education fund, some kind of wisdom fund, some kind of intellectual pool to give direction to maybe 50 students, maybe 100 students, maybe becomes 1,000 students. But we don't do these things. We really do not do anything. Some people do, some corner, but that's not good enough. It is not known to others. So, sir, this is how it is. It is the situation. But anyway, it was a very wonderful lecture, a wonderful session. We have learned just to forget, I think, again, to take the lesson, embrace it for a while, and then as we have become, just let it go, let it go, let it go. Yeah, we embrace it. For the moment, we get very emotional, very positive, but there must be something going on with us since centuries that we are not really, nothing stirs us, nothing moves us. But we move very quickly, politically, emotionally, religiously, we move very quickly. But we don't move educationally. That is true. You keep on saying education is the first priority, It becomes instantly within a minute last priority. You go to any drawing room across here or in India, Karachi, Lahore, everywhere. They are so engaged in political theater inside their assemblies, religious theaters, this and that. You will not hear anything on education. That topic rarely comes up.
Yeah.
Even I'm talking about educated houses. They earn their living due to that education. But in their drawing rooms, the education, technology, science, professionalism finds the last item on the plate.
Thank you so much. And that concludes the session. And thank you again for all the speakers. And
आपको कोई शेर याद है नजीर साहब कि जब एकदम डाउन हो जाए आदमी बिल्कुल तो उसको उभारने के लिए इकबाल ही को लाना पड़ेगा ना तो और किसी और को लाना पड़ेगा
मुश्किलें इतनी पड़ी आसान होंगी
ये भी बहुत पिट गया है भाई इस पे भी कोई असर नहीं हो रहा
बाहर आएगी इस्लाम के उजड़े गुलिस्तान पर इसी शाखे कोहन पर फिर हमारा आशियां होगा
या इसी उम्मीद पे जिंदा हैं
एक बात है कि अगर उर्दू शेर ना होते तो हम तो बिल्कुल ही मर गए होते वो हमको झिलाए रखता जब्बार साहब apologies you have to learn Urdu okay otherwise you cannot survive with this crowd okay
that's fine I sense the importance of
good all right
that's more important
all right good.
Take care wonderful
Abdul Jabbar Saab said and I kind of agree that you cannot place all the blame to mullahs. Let the mullahs do what are they doing. But the question is, they the educated people. Yeah, mullahs, it will take like 50 years to, or maybe 30 years for the to convert, as Nazeer Saab said, to convert this madrasas integrated into science and technology. I don't see a hope. I am really a realist person, and there is so much powerful, like the Brahmins have controlled the lives of Indians, the same way mullahs control the lives of Muslims. And unfortunately, even here in the US, you go to the khutbahs and look at this, what they talk about. There is never a scintilla exciting
Brahmins don't control brains and minds of Hindus.
Oh, Razi bhai, they do. Nothing moves without them.
Well, I've been with Brahmins 5-6 years.
No, I'm saying there's Brahmins, I mean Pandits.
Hindus are very different.
Okay, let me correct myself. I am saying the Pandits, those who go to the households and they know how to manipulate the sentiments of Hindu community. But that's not the discussion here. This discussion is the Muslim education. And I will not even focus on the Indian Muslims. I am saying nothing is coming from the Middle East. Those are who are so rich, and all the Arabs, which are usually quoted, oh, Alchemy this, that, and Persians did that, and all those beautiful discoveries we still talk about. Nothing is coming from them either. So there was no Indian single Muslim who discovered something which is known in the scientific world.
Because we are not doing, Muslims are not, as Nazeer Sahab has said, and many others have said, since 12th century onward, Muslims have been on the downtrend, not doing anything.
that's
So
what
whether Indian Muslim or whether Arab Muslims or Greek Muslim or Turkish Muslim, that's not the issue. The issue is how, we already know that we have sunk down, but how to do anything positive. And as far as this discussion came to Brahmans.
So speakers, Nazeer Saab, and they have been long for 2 hours, and they are excused if they wanted to move on.
Yeah, they are local. Don't worry, they have Ramzan. They're not going to eat anything. And they are sitting here only to pray and all those. What I'm saying is, this about Mullah and Madrasa, by the way, in India, Muslim population doesn't go more than 4% are not Madrasa going.
Yeah.
So we have this very easy excuse on Madrasa and Mullah in that.
Exactly.
4%, not beyond 4 to 4.5% go to Madrasas, a certain class go, but the talk is about, the theme is about how to the regular Muslims who, because of no guidance, because of lack of education, because of lack of resources, they are themselves very frustrated what to do.
So let me make one concluding remark, then actually I do have to leave. I did hear a lot of criticism of the mullahs and the madrasas, and I think most of it is justified. But I also would so I think there's a separation of the mullahs who think maybe not intellectually, and they're intellectuals. And there's a separation. So the mullahs don't want to have anything to do with education and intellect, but the intellectuals don't want to do anything with the religious part by and large. So there's, I think, a separation. They may have given up. So the only way to actually, if we, the intellectuals, or what we consider ourselves as intellectuals, if you want to change them, we cannot be sitting on the fringes and criticize. So we had to become part of them or their microenvironment. So a practical tip is, so for example, in America, or I guess in India and in Pakistan also, if you're an intellectual and educated, you're not happy with the situation, become part of that. You cannot make a change from outside.
Yeah.
We have to make a change. If you really want to make a change, we have to make the change from within. That's my concluding remark and recommendation.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's really now disperse. This is over 2 hours. And even though we are not going to, most of us are not going to eat, but still we feel tired, okay? So,
I just want to say, Naqvi Saab, how can you depend on mullahs? I mean, our mohalla mullahs. Do you think they will ever talk about the science?
No,
they will talk about, we are talking about the illiterate mullahs, those who come and recite something from Quran for every Jummah, and there is no translation. Public just sit there, because I'm talking my hometown. And I have been going, and they just come, recite something. At least in the US, they translate it. But in India, they recite something, and then prayer begins. Over. How can you expect them to be integrated in science and technology? This is out of my comprehension.
Listen, what I'm saying is simply, in any society, whether Indian Hindu society or here American, anywhere you go, any society, the real onus or the burden on the shoulder should come from the middle class educated people. They are the one who lead, who give direction to their respective communities. We Muslims have failed in that. The educated Muslim class, wherever in their respective countries, they did not pay any attention to give direction, help, or guidance to larger sections of their society. They just minded their own business, and they neglected all the moral responsibilities. That's what has happened to India especially. We have just kept to ourselves, our building our own careers.
Ratibhai, I see a Pam Reitman. Maybe she wants to say something. She may have a different perspective.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is that Javai? Thank you. What I want to say is simply that I think it's important that there be room for all of these views, because I sense your frustration. And I think really all of the points of view are right. Obviously, those who don't have the education are not going to lead the charge for education. And we have to be careful not to shame them. We have to give to those who don't have the education a voice and a respect, so that then they can learn a minimum to be able to participate on another level. And that's really what I meant to say. I mean, I also was drawn to one view, drawn to the other view, thinking whoever I'm listening to, you're right, but then I hear the other side. But I think if there's room for everything, all of the ideas you're bringing, and you work toward them, I want to say, I really do think it will take a generation or two, and I think you can make a difference.
Yeah, so thank you, Rabbi Pam. I was about to actually make a comment on that. It's just that, you know, the previous comment was just really frustration, and it's not going to work, it's not going to change. Don't worry about making a change on day one or year one. Just remember, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, preached to the age of the Jahiliyyah, but he didn't make a change.
And excuse me, not only did he preach to that age, but he preached to the illiterate, and look what he could accomplish. And so you will also be able to preach to the illiterate. You just need to get the ones who are illiterate in science to come onto the wagon.
Very good. Thank you.
And then don't expect that it's going to happen overnight. Remember, even the Quran was revealed over 23 years. The Islamic fiqh we see, it was revealed very gradually. The change happened very gradually. People don't like to change, right? We know that, regardless, whatever the change is.
Yes.
So don't expect the change will happen overnight. It's going to be a very long-term commitment by people who want to make a change. And like I said, the change has to happen from within.
The problem is nobody is initiating even for the changes. No, there is no collective attempt seen. It's not the end product we are talking, we anticipate a quick change or anything. There is no movement. There are no organization who are really carrying this burden, taking others also. I mean, are there any really who are doing things?
But the thing is, as soon as you switch, just one word in what you're saying is to say which will be the ones.
Right.
I'm agreeing with you completely. Just instead of to say there are none, to say which will be. Maybe somebody who was inspired by this program that you closed us off and brought us back so that we could hear you.
I would just share one, and I think shared with at least some of you in this story. I don't know how true it is, but I think it's worth mentioning it. A friend of mine told me this a while back, and I use it all the time whenever I'm thinking about the magnitude of change or what needs to be done. So when Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him, was being put to fire, there was a family of frogs. So one of the frogs saw this pond of water, and then he started to put the water in his mouth, and he started to squirt water onto the fire. His family started to laugh at him, and he said, "You stupid, do you think you are going to actually put out this fire by spitting?" He said, "I don't know if I'm going to be able to put out the fire, but I do know that when God will ask me what I did to save Abraham on the day of judgment, I'll tell him I did what I could." So I remember this. So we have to actually think about is, are we doing what we can, and then forget about the rest and what else can be done? Who else is going to do it?
Okay, I also want to draw your attention, over here they say the Nobel Peace Prize, right? That goes into science and technology. 35% of that has been more associated with the Jewish community. So I think we have to really learn how did the Jewish community, contributed so immensely to this thing,
Sure.
Okay, and secondly, during Spain, it was very common for Moses Maimonides, okay, and then Al-Ghazali and Thomas of also Aquinas to come together in a very interfaith perspective, because there was peace among people when we were all working together. And this I find is thoroughly lacking, but at least we can create that climate in United States of America. You know, there are so many Jewish, Christian, and Hindus and Buddhists. I think if we take the initiative and work together, I think that kind of a basic cooperation I see is very important. Thank you.
Yes, and I want to say just one last thing to Razi Saib, that I think your frustration is very well placed. And I really mean it when I say, may it be that as you express what's missing, if you can say, who's going to pick it up? Because I think that the Jews and the Christians and the others will not take a lead in this, because we won't know what to do. But when our Muslim sisters and brothers who are the intellectuals and who have some money in their pockets will take a lead and start to lead, and then we'll get an email from someone and it says, here's this cause. And if you send some money, it will help to get science taught to girls and boys in schools in India or Pakistan, then some dollars could start to go. But I really think, that you're right, that the lead has to come from the Muslims.
Yes, sure. No doubt about it. Thank you very much.